Hello, this is Jamie Mitchell, and we are back for another episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have, "This is my apology," posted by JSTN Pothoff, and they said, "I've never been a fan of the Republican Party, the conservative movement, the Tea Party, or MAGA, and I thought Donald Trump was a terrible candidate long before he had any political traction. I was a Democrat before I became a Libertarian, but I'm not a fan of the left either. For decades, I've labeled the Republicans and Democrats as differently bad. They still are, but I would never say one is worse. Donald Trump and all of his minions in power finally succeeded in changing my mind. I'm appalled at the rhetoric and shocked at what they're actually doing. I didn't think it was possible. I'm sure I would hate Harris' presidency, but I highly doubt it'd be as disgusting of our government as it or society if she had won. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. My vote nor my opinion would have changed absolutely nothing, but I rolled my eyes at everyone who told me how dangerous Trump was, and they were right, and he's not even 9 months into this term." And yeah, my thoughts on that are, personally, I don't care for a lot of Donald Trump or his rhetoric. I think he's very spazzy. He always has to say shit to rile everyone up. But that being said, the differences between him and Harris really aren't nearly as much as the social media or the legacy media would have you believe. I'm pretty sure Kamala Harris would have done a lot of the exact same things Donald Trump did if she was put into power. Maybe some of the Coach War things would be different, but regardless, it's pretty much they're two sides of the same shit coin. I'm sure she probably would have bombed Iran as well, and then Reddit would have been all over it. She would have, and then would have gone, "Oh, Kamala's standing up to the anti-LGBTQ plus whatever other letters they've added as well regime in Iran. Isn't that great?" But it just goes to show you that it's all pretty much just like WWE. It's all just theater. The president's really just a figurehead first and foremost, and the troops like the deep state, the CIA, the FBI, the other alpha agencies, and the military-industrial complex, and big business. They're the ones who really want to run the country, not the president. The president's just a figurehead, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have removed by Reddit, posted by Mundane Image 13, and that says removed by Reddit on account of violating the content policy. And they said in the comments it was an image of an this Facebook post. Not sure why it was removed though. And they linked to an image of a Facebook post from former Secretary of Labor Robert Reich, and they posted, "See the problem here," and then and then it was linked to their post they made on Blue Sky. Airlines merged from 12 major carriers in 1980 to 4 today. Four giants control 80% of meat processing. A handful of companies control the pharmaceutical industry. The evidence of corporate concentration is everywhere. It means more power for them and less freedom for you." And that was them quote tweeting a Blue Sky post from More Perfect Union. In 1983, 50 companies controlled 90% of the U.S. media market. That number is now down to 5. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that. It just goes to show you how, the government, if it wasn't for the government, you'd have, I think, a lot more companies. But over since 1980, or under neoliberalism, companies are encouraged to merge and get bigger and bigger rather than compete with other companies. And that's going to show you. I think the libertarian position is, if the government didn't offer so many incentives for companies to be as big as possible, and also didn't provide them all these government contracts, maybe we would have more competition. I think, a big thing right now in the U.S., you don't have capitalism, you have more so cronyism, where the government picks winners and losers, and that's very much how, the libertarian position is. If you had less government, you'd probably have more companies and more competition. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have John Called It, posted by Baton13, and that's a crosspost from the Daily Show subreddit. And that looks like a video of Jon Stewart speaking on PBS. Threat to comedy, yada yada yada. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for Jon Stewart. I used to like him back in the 2000s. But since then he's pretty much taken the path that all the late night host has, with the possible exception of Bill Maher. Bill Maher does it occasionally too, but they all pretty much say the same thing every night. Orange Man bad. They're pretty much all become just MSNBC. And yeah, personally, I don't know why we needed late night to become another MSNBC. I think that might be some government doing as well. Reddit's like, the FCC forced Jimmy Kimmel off the air. Well, I would say the thing that had him on the air in the first place was probably government interest as well. I like what Dave Smith tweeted on this issue. I'll see if I can pull it up. I retweeted it recently. Where is it? There it is. I oppose the FCC threatening ABC, but not for libertarian or moral reasons. I oppose it strictly on strategic ground. It's a bad idea. We were already destroying Kimmel. No need to have the refs cheat now. It only gives the liberal media class a boost of energy. I would morally and on libertarian grounds oppose government pressuring company to fire a comedian for telling a joke, no matter how off or inaccurate the joke was. That's not what this is. Jimmy Kimmel stopped being a comedian years ago. He became a regime mouthpiece willingly and knowingly. He is part of the cathedral. This is closer to the CIA feuding with the FBI. It's two criminal elements of the regime fighting, both of whom are enemies of liberty. Full podcast on this today. And yeah, personally, it just goes to show you, Jimmy Kimmel, he's pretty much just, like your average MSNBC host at this point, like Jen Psaki or Joy Reid or Rachel Maddow. He only says Orange Man bad, Democrats good. And personally, I do think him getting forced off the air by the state, arguably by the state, isn't good. But if that being said, he's arguably a mouthpiece for the state as well, just the other branch of the Uniparty. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Fred Folgery articles posted by Anarcho Federation, and that they said some pieces from Folgery for Center for Stateless Society, free to anti-market, anti-capitalism, and that's from centerforstatelesssociety.org. And yeah, that's some articles that author wrote for that piece, I guess. It looks like the titles are land prisoners need not be corrupted. Humans have a moral claim on land and its resources. Georgia's system is prudential. Georgia's occupancy with for rent. And yeah, this does also sound interesting. I personally, as I said in the last episode, I'm sympathetic to Georgism, but I do think all taxes are theft, even if it's, it's an extremely justified tax, like a land value tax. I think that would probably be the most justified use of taxation, but it still would be theft if people don't want to consent to it if they don't feel like it. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have FBI to categorize trans people as quote-unquote nihilistic violent extremists. Threat group report says. Posted from them.us, posted by LegioX, and they added, and that's across from the LGBT subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for the transgender community as a whole. It's pretty much a lot of people who I think are just trying to chase a trend rather than legitimate gender dysphoria. It's a lot like the kids who identified as emo back in the 2000s when I was a kid. But, yeah, personally, I don't think the government should be labeling any group as nihilistic, violent extremists. Ultimately, that's ultimately the government's prerogative. They can label any group they want to as that and go after them as such, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. I remember under Biden, the FBI was saying, oh, Christians who pray the rosary are violent extremists, and that just goes to show you how, it's ultimately going to be subjective who the government goes after. I definitely do think, a lot of transgender people do have issues with nihilism and might not be in the best mental health, but regardless, if they want to, as long as they're not actively hurting anyone else, they shouldn't, I don't think the state should be going after them, same with pretty much every other group. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have, after getting Jimmy Kimmel suspended, FCC chair threatens ABC's The View from ArsTechnica.com, posted by MTRO5585. And yeah, personally, I think The View is another one of those shows that's pretty much just a DNC circle jerk. But regardless, The View being canceled would obviously help the narrative that Trump's a fascist. And I like what Dave Smith said. You gotta let them fail on their own merits. You can't just cancel them. They're just increasingly irrelevant. And they're the only things that they exist to do anymore is social media rage bait. And that's why it's gotta let them fade into obscurity rather than cancel them. And that's very much the libertarian position, I would say. Next tab, we have Trump to add $100,000 fee for H-1B visas, up from $1,700 to $4,500 currently, from CBSNews.com, posted by XGHTie737. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for any fees when it comes to immigration. I think people should be able to travel wherever they want to without having to pay anything, but the government's in a position where if they want to charge you all the money in the world, they have the monopoly and legal force justify doing so. And yeah, personally, I do think H-1B visas for actual high skilled immigrants are probably one of the more justified arguments for immigration. But regardless, if the government does want to charge you as a shit ton of money for them, that's on the government. Ultimately the government can enforce whatever it wants to, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. Next we have, I like the idea behind the word hypernormalization posted by Background Maybe 402, and that was a cross post they made from the anarcho-capitalism subreddit, and that looks like a huge wall of text. And I'll see if I can get some into it. But to understand it first, we must first understand where the term normalization came from. In 1968, local communist leaders in Czechoslovakia launched what was called Prague Spring, a movement with the goal of liberating the people from the oppressive control of the USSR and to push for human rights like freedom of speech, freedom of association, as well as a decentralized approach to markets and self-governance of the people of Czechoslovakia. The USSR had been ruling with an iron fist and top-down centralized method that led to economic stagnation, poor quality of life, and extreme limitations of individual liberty. Within the same year, 1968, the USSR, along with the Warsaw Pact countries, including Romania, including Czechoslovakia, to crush this new resistance and prevent a cascade effect of every region self-liberating. The Soviets-led forces moved in with 250,000 troops. They fired upon unarmed and peaceful crowds of civilians. The goal of the Soviet-led crushing of the resistance was to demoralize the people of Czechoslovakia and to ensure a liberation movement never starts again. To accomplish this, they had a massive show of force of troops, tanks, project power. They carried out a purge of any sympathizers. Over 500,000 people were forcibly removed from the Communist Party. This was basically a sense of destitution. People unable to affiliate with the party lost their jobs and any prospects of a career and their social standing. The intelligentsia, who was even tangentially involved in the freedom movement, were barred from their jobs as teachers, university professors, journalists, writers, scientists, lawyers, and managers. This intelligentsia was subsequently forced into hard labor. The children of those involved were barred from attending school or university. All reformist newspapers and journals were shut down, books were removed from libraries and pulped, films were banned, the Union of Writers and Journalists were dissolved, a profound silence and stagnation fell over the cultural landscape, replaced by sterile, state-approved propaganda. The state security STB was massively expanded and became the primary tool of enforcement. A vast network of informants was cultivated, often by blackmail or coercion, turning neighbors, colleagues, or even family members against one another. Citizens were subject to constant surveillance, phone tapping, interrogations, and harassment. The goal was to create a climate of pervasive fear, mistrust, and paranoia, ensuring that any flawed dissent was crushed before it could be expressed. A nation that's briefly experienced freedom of expression and the hope for a better future is forced to publicly recant, deny its own experiences, and participate in its own humiliation. People were required to sign statements condemning the Prague Spring and supporting the invasion. The ritual of forced compliance was designed to break the national will and to create a sense of hopelessness and powerlessness, a state of learned helplessness where the population was conditioned to believe the resistance was utterly futile. After the Soviets had regained control of the nation, Soviet Premier Leonid Brezhnev said, "Now the situation is normalized." This was a cruel joke referencing that the people will have been crushed and powered and returned to the hands of the Soviets. This is when the term normalization was coined. The concept of hypernormalization was coined by Russian anthropologist Alexei Yurchak and popularized in the documentary from Adam Curtis. It's normalization on steroids, moving from simply imposing a false reality, creating a society that collaborates its own deception because the truth has become too complex, frightening, or powerless to confront. In essence, it follows 4 steps. 1, the collapse of coherent reality. 2, the retreat in simulacra. 3, the public's complicity. 4, the result of a barrier to change. The collapse of coherent reality is fostered by an erosion of a shared objective understanding of the world. This happens through an overwhelming flow of information, misinformation, the blurring of lines between news and entertainment, and the propagation of contradictory narratives. The goal is to create a pervasive sense that no one is truly in control and that the world is too complex for anyone to understand, let alone manage. The retreat into simulacra, faced with this paralyzing complexity of those in power, politicians, corporations, and media don't try to solve the complex problems. Instead, they retreat into the management of simulacra, simplified models and fictional versions of the world that are easier to control, meaning that managing the news stories becomes a goal rather than the search for the objective truth. Abstract management indicators like GDP and stock markets become the barometer for the health of society, and complex geopolitical ideas are simplified into good versus evil narratives for public consumption. Public complicity is the key accelerator. Unlike 1968, where the Czechs knew they were being lied to, in a hyper-normalized society, people actually choose their own reality. We curate our news feeds to hear what we want to hear. We join online tribes that reinforce our preferred narratives. We do this because it's less psychologically taxing than confronting a chaotic and frightening world. We become willing participants in our own deception because the alternative is in reality where we have little agency is too painful, a barrier to change. The ultimate effect is that real progress becomes impossible. Everyone is so busy engaging with and defending the truth and simplified model of the world, and no one can agree on the actual name of nature of the problems, let alone muster the collective will to solve them. In short, Brezhnev's normalization was a state of forcing a lot of the people. Hyper-normalization is state media and tech platforms providing tools for the people to build their own lives and willingly live inside them, making the entire system far more resilient and much harder to challenge. It's a prison where the inmates are not only guard the walls, but have come to believe they've built them for their own protection. And yeah, I would agree with all that. Right now I'd say society is very much hyper-normalized to the fact that, everything's screwed and we just have to cope with it. So, yeah, ultimately, believe people should believe whatever they want to believe, but, it's hard to argue and debate people when they live very much in a different reality from the reality that you live in. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have the root of the problem isn't Disney, it's the government, posted by Plasma Manfredi, and they said the executive branch should not have the power to yank any broadcaster's license because you disagree with the message they broadcast. Fix that and you make sure that another Colbert or Kimmel never happens again. The FCC's job is to license bandwidth since it's a limited resource, not decide what is on that bandwidth. Yes, I'm pissed at Disney for caving, but even if Disney didn't cave, the problem would still exist. And I'd agree with that. I think the libertarian position is, there shouldn't be any licenses from the FCC in the first place. The FCC is just another three-letter alphabet agency that should be done away with, And as Daryl Parrisley famously said, what's next? A license to toast in your own damn toaster? And yeah, that just goes to show you how, we don't have licenses for anything, if the bandwidth, it should be whoever takes ownership of it to do whatever they want with it, and the government shouldn't be picking winners and losers in that regard. Especially when it comes to broadcast television, you only have 3 or 4 channels in there, and yeah, I think if the people want ABC to take over the bandwidth, that's fine. But I do think ABC should be able to challenge. You should be able to take them out if you want to, and make your own broadcast television. And that's increasingly what social media has been doing. It's decentralizing the narrative so that everyone can control it. And as we talked about in the previous post, that can be kind of difficult with everyone living in their own reality. But it's very much, I would say, better than one centralized narrative that's basically controlled by the state, and you aren't allowed to dissent from it at all without being thrown in jail over it. And that's my thoughts on that issue. And let's see, I think that's it for this episode. I think that's it for the new post. So I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.